Hello, this is Ig Arthur, or E.G. Arthur if you prefer, and for Midsummer 2023, which is fast drawing to a close, what I'm doing here in this video is a 100 token challenge. Now, normally what I do for festivals is I take different festival activities and I optimize them and put out videos for those activities. But this year I decided to do something a little different. Instead of just segregating the different parts of a festival, I'm putting a token goal out there, and any way that that goal can be attained, subject to certain constraints, which I'll get into. It doesn't matter whether it's outside of Minas Tirith Midsummer, inside, whether it's a crafting quest, whether it's a a click on an NPC quest, whether it's a collection quest, delivering booze, whatever. However you can get to 100 within the constraints that I'll lay out here is fair game, and then try to optimize within that. The end result is that, based on what I've done so far, is I was able to get to 100 tokens in about 64 minutes. Now, there are some caveats and qualifications to that, such as that it is crafting assisted, meaning that I crafted some items ahead of time to just turn them in. It includes a booze run portion, which the usual caveat there is that the booze drinks are purchased ahead of time, acquired ahead of time. So, I mean, there's a number of qualifications to that, but the headline is that it's 64 minutes to acquire 100 tokens. So, but before I get into the details of how I did that, I'd just like to answer the question of why. Why do a token challenge rather than just trying to optimize various aspects of the festival? Well, first of all, it's just a new way of doing things. As I said before, it gives more flexibility and more options for different ways to approach the goal, the point or the purpose of the run. Another thing is I want people to be inspired to come up with their own optimizations, because it is so fluid and diverse that I'm sure that there are other people that are going to come up with better ideas for doing this in an even shorter amount of time. So I want this to be the start of a process, and that's why I called it a challenge. Is that I'm kind of challenging others to step up to the plate and come up with their own ideas and suggestions. Another very practical reason for putting out this challenge, and I apologize for how late it is in the festival, but I think it's timely in that if people are kind of despairing of being able to generate enough tokens to acquire the things they want from the festival, such as cosmetic pets or housing items or emotes or mounts or whatever, this should give them some ideas about how to generate a lot of tokens quickly. Now, I don't expect that everybody is going to meet all the prerequisites for this. In fact, to be honest, most of my characters can't do this run because they don't meet the prerequisites, even if they're high level. Because they haven't done various rep grinds and for various other reasons. So it's not going to be something that you should follow necessarily step by step by step, but at least it should give you some ideas about how you can efficiently grind out a bunch of tokens in a short amount of time. I mean, the big idea here is that to get that many tokens in that short of a time, you're pretty much forced to do both at least a partial booze run, if not a full booze run, and also to run around Minas Tirith Midsummer to do various quests there. So neither one of those alone is going to give you 100 tokens. So you need to combine them. And lastly, the last bullet point is that I wanted to kind of get away from publishing separate videos for both of these things, for the booze run and for the Midsummer 10 quest daily wrapper, as I've done in the past. So on that last note, in 2022, I want to give came out a little bit of a videos, kind of a history lesson during the Midsummer Festival. One of them was a booze run optimization, and I called that Treebeard Hardcore Enedwaith because it was focused on doing the booze run on the Treebeard server shortly after the Enedwaith content was released. I think it was released in late June, and the video was made in early July, and it was right after I had done the rep grind for the port, or one of the ports in Enedwaith, which was a key factor in that booze run optimization. And the hardcore refers to a number of constraints, which I'll get into later. But that run was 28 minutes. I should note that Treebeard at the time did not have war steeds, so that's a 28-minute run without war steeds. That it was kind of in response to an earlier pre-Enedwaith video that was put out by Life Beyond the Shire, and they had a 35-minute run for a booze run under similar constraints, but they were lacking the Enedwaith content, so they didn't benefit from that. Plus, I added some of my own optimizations and got it down to 28 minutes. For Midsummer Festival itself, about the same time, I put out a video where, with an even more strict set of constraints, namely no travel skills, no homestead ports, no milestones, no reputation ports, purely from running around Midsummer Minas Tirith on a mount or using a stable taxi or walking or running. I was able to do the 10 quest daily wrapper in 15 minutes. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that is crafting assisted. So 4 of those 10 quests consisted only of turning in crafted items that had been created prior to the run. So in 2023, I've been working on optimizing both of those things. And part of my improvements here are due to a loosening of constraints. So, as I mentioned in 2022, Treebeard didn't have war steeds, so the Treebeard focused run was purely on a regular mount. Now, I'm allowing the use of war steeds, and that applies both to the booze run and also the Minas Tirith Midsummer video as well, or the route there. By the way, I'm going to occasionally be abbreviating Minas Tirith Midsummer to MTM, not to be confused with Mary Tyler Moore, but just because it's easier for me to say MTM than it is Minas Tirith Midsummer. Another thing that I've introduced in this year's optimization of the booze run is to add one of the routes, the swift travel routes from the Before the Shadow expansion, specifically the route from Herne in Cardolan to the Inn of the Forsaken in the Lone Lands. Replacing that route actually kind of had a chain reaction effect, because by freeing up the Ostcaruth port, I was able to use that to make one of the stops more time efficient, and that had previously used the Tornhead port, and by freeing up the Tornhead port, then I was able to make another part of the run more efficient as well. So it didn't just help that particular segment of the route, it actually had multiple ripple effects. Another thing I've added to this year's route, the optimized route, is the Björninghus port. And by adding that, I I am, by implication, excluding Treebeard, because the Bjorning His Port comes from the Vales of Anduin content, which is not yet available on Treebeard and won't be available for years yet. But for Treebeard, there are reasonable substitutions. It just means it's going to take the run is going to take a little longer on that server. So the bottom line here is that I reduce the booze run, the runtime of the booze run from 28 minutes to 24 minutes. For the 10 quest wrapper in MTM, I added the ability to use a war steed and also a single use of a milestone skill. Even if you've bought the upgrade or one or both upgrades, and maybe you have a milestone skill cooldown of 5 minutes, I just arbitrarily, I'm just going to limit it to only one use of a milestone. And just as a general statement, one of the reasons that I put all these constraints on things is not just to kind of show off, how challenging it is, but also to make it more accessible to people. Not everybody can afford to pay for those cooldown reductions for milestones, for return to skills, and so forth. So I want to make this available to everyone, or as many people as possible. So I was able to reduce the runtime of the 10 quest daily wrapper with all these modifications and tweaks and optimizations down to 11 minutes. But I didn't want to just put out separate videos for these, because while these are significant improvements on a percentage basis, they don't really reach out and grab the viewer and say, this is a really awesome improvement. This is, totally new way of thinking about things. They're really just kind of incremental improvements for the most part. And so I wrestled with the idea of coming out with multiple videos for these. What I really wanted to do, and what I'm obviously ended up doing, was to come up with a single video, but I needed a unifying theme. So I went around and looked for a unifying theme. One thing that doesn't help is geography. The booze run takes place in Eriador. That map is a little on the left of Eriador, is a little out of date, by the way. It looks like it doesn't include Swanfleet and Cardolan, among others. But in any case, the booze run takes place in Eriador, all over Eriador, whereas on the right side, the MTM run takes place completely within Midsummer, or Minas Tirith Midsummer, which is in Aldernorian, which is in Gondor, which is a long, long, long way away from Eriador. So there's no real unifying theme in terms of geography. One could also argue that there's no unifying theme in terms of chronology, because the events that you get involved with when you're doing your normal Eriador questing, for the most part, take place as the Fellowship, either as the Fellowship is making their way to Rivendell or shortly after they've departed. Whereas Minas Tirith Midsummer, that content, it takes place after the fall of Sauron, though the wedding takes place some months after the fall of Sauron. So that, in terms of the chronological separation there, is pretty huge. So if geography and chronology don't help to provide a unifying theme, what does? Well, what I eventually homed in on was currency. The main reason for doing a booze run is to acquire the tokens of taste, badges of taste, and badges of dishonor from the Inn League and the Ale Association, respectively. And the main reason for acquiring those is to barter for boxes of festival tokens. Now, when you open those up, you get a choice of which kind of festival token you get. But assuming that you pick Midsummer, since that's the festival that's currently active, then what you get is Midsummer tokens, which are exactly the same tokens you get from doing the daily wrapper run at MTM. So I picked that as my unifying theme, and then set a threshold, a goal of 100, which is high enough to require both booze run and also questing in MTM. So as soon as I set that goal, then my first realization was that the booze run as I currently have it and the 10 quest wrapper run as I currently have it, as if you add those together, it's still far short of the 100 that I need. The booze run will get you at most 33 tokens, and that's only if you consider the average. The reason there's a difference between the average and the standalone is because you have to barter for those festival token boxes in pairs of tokens. A full booze run gives you 11 tokens on each side for each faction, which is only 5 pairs of tokens. So you can only get 5 boxes from each side. 10 boxes opens up to give you 30 tokens. If you were to do the booze run day after day after day, however, then you would average out to getting 11 boxes per day, and that would open to 33 tokens. That's why there's a distinction there between average and standalone. The 10 quest daily wrapper, each of those 10 quests gives you 3 tokens. Then when you hand in the wrapper, you get an extra 5 tokens, so that's 35. But you add those totals together, you get 68, and obviously you're going to need more questing and more token acquisition in order to hit that 100 threshold. So just to give you an insight into how one constructs all of this, I'm going to look for more things to add to this mix to get me up to 100. My first round of additions, if you see on the left-hand side there, I'm going to do 1 extra in-league quest in addition to the booze run, and 1 extra Ale Association quest. Now, the in-league quests that are outside of the booze runs are all called covert reparations, and then they're numbered. And I'm going to do covert reparations number 1, which is located completely within Thorin's Hall. And then for the Ale Association, I'm going to do Jonar's Special Delivery, which you pick up and turn into Jonar, who's in the Thorin's Hall Inn. But it consists of dropping a stink bomb at the party tree. So the quest objective is in the Shire, even though the quest giver and the quest turner inner of her is located in Thorin's Hall Inn. I'll do the dropping of the stink bomb as just like a little side route from the booze run. On the Midsummer Minas Tirith side, I'm going to do no fewer than 9 extra quests in Midsummer. So I'm almost doubling the number of quests that I'm doing, and that's going to get me up to 60 tokens. And just to note the fact that the division doesn't quite work out there, I'm adding 9 quests and getting 25 more tokens. Mathematically, that's because 8 of those quests are normal in that they give you 3 tokens, but one of them is a feast hall wrapper quest, which only gives 1 token. So that's how I get to 60. So you add those up, and you get 96 tokens. So that still leaves me just a little bit short. So I need my final round of fillers here. You see in the lower left-hand corner, I'm going to do a horse race as a little side route of my booze run, the Breland horse race. I'm running right by it, so why not? And the other thing I'm going to do is in Thorin's Hall, I'm going to do one of the kit gathering quests. As part of Midsummer, you may or may not realize, there are quests out in the various low-level areas of Eriador that you run around and do stuff, and it awards 1 Midsummer token and a kit, a crafting kit, which you can then use to make a crafted item, which you can turn in for those crafting quests, which are called Without a Hitch. So the one I'm going to do here is the one in Thorin's Hall, which consists of running around and finding unkempt dwarves and shining their beards. It's a very cute quest, but it's useful here because I'm in Thorin's Hall anyway doing stuff, so I can get a lot of synergy by doing this at the same time. So between the horse race and the kit gathering quest, that's the extra 4 tokens that I need to fill out 100 tokens. Just still in the mindset of how I'm going to construct this, I just want to make clear that that the booze run includes a single use of a milestone skill. And I mentioned earlier that the latest evolution of my 10 quest daily wrapper in MTM also allows a single use of a milestone skill. But what I'm saying in my constraints is that only one use is allowed for the entire run. So I had to make a decision as a route designer. I had to make a decision: am I going to use it in the booze run, or am I going to use my milestone in MTM? And ultimately, I decided it is more time efficient to use my single milestone skill in the booze run. So you'll see that as I go through it. All right, so let's talk about constraints. And I know this is a big, intimidating wall of text, but I think it's important to have constraints because not only does it increase the challenge for those who are doing it as prescribed here, but it also makes it more accessible to a wider group of people. Not everybody has the wherewithal to buy upgrades and items from the store. Not everybody has the time to grind out all of the various reputations and things like that. So by putting a set of constraints on here, it allows more people. And then if people want to loosen the constraints in order to make this even faster, then they can do so. But at least it lays a foundation, a baseline for how to do the run. So the constraints that you see here on this slide are a conglomeration of mostly from constraints that I've developed for my various booze run optimizations, and I have several different variants of those. In addition to the hardcore set of constraints, which is mostly what this is, I also have what I call a whale set of constraints, where I allow various kinds of store purchases, a great whale where even more store purchases are allowed, and even the use of mithril coin in real time, and so forth. But most of these are from the booze runs. The very last bullet point is not, however, and I'll get to that at the end there. But so, as I said, some of these are core constraints, and that includes the first one here, which is that it's solo. All of my booze runs, I have this constraint that it's done solo, and the way I'm defining that is that it is not the product of any coordinated effort by characters that are on multiple accounts. Now, one of the key words there is coordinated. I'll give you an example of an uncoordinated benefit that you may just randomly get from another player. If you're approaching the door of the Prancing Pony, and as you come close to it, somebody else exits the Prancing Pony, then the door will be open, and so you won't have to click on it in order to open the door. You can just move forward and pass through the portal. So that may save you a fraction of a second, and it is in terms of causation, it is the result of something that someone else on another account did, but it was not coordinated and it was not planned. So I wouldn't necessarily consider that to be a disqualifier. And I wouldn't want people to have to abandon a whole run just because someone accidentally opened a doorway from the other side. So that kind of thing is permissible. Another kind of thing that's permissible is the use of alts. I mentioned earlier that the MTM portion of this run is crafting assisted, in as much as 4 of the quests that are done there are just simply turn-ins of crafted items. Now, you could buy those crafted items off the auction house, but even if you used your own alts to craft them, then currently you would need at least 2 characters in order to craft all of those items, because each vocation can at most craft 2 types of items. So you need at least 2 crafters to provide the items for all 4 quests. One of the things that's promised as part of the crafting system revamp this year is that ultimately a character will be able to acquire 4 arbitrary professions. So for next year's Midsummer Festival, it's likely that a single character could produce all of the items for those quests. But for right now, it requires 2 characters. But as long as those characters are on the same account, then it doesn't violate this constraint. What does violate the constraint, however, is the use of a Homnanigans map. And the reason for that is, although you could buy Homnanigans tokens from the auction house, the only source of Homnanigans tokens is to actually run Homnanigans matches, and that is not soloable. Even if you were to multi-box and run a Homnanigans match by yourself, that would still be coordinated effort on multiple accounts, and therefore it would violate the constraint. So no Homnanigans maps. That map, by the way, would help to speed up the booze run stop of Thornley's worksite. So it would be useful, but I'm taking a hard line on that and saying, because it really steps over the boundary of what I consider to be solo, then I'm not going to allow it. All right, so the next bullet item here relates to travel skills. And here we're going to get into some terminology here. The travel skills that I allow are reputation-based ones, milestones, and homestead ports. So a reputation-based port is one that you acquire that is, you need a certain level of reputation with a faction to acquire their reputation port. Now, in most cases, you not only need to have a certain standing with that faction, but you also need to have some barter for the port. But in the case of something like the Eglain, as soon as you hit kindred with the Eglain, then you get the Ostgaruth port. So it doesn't always require barter. But the defining element here is that it does require some sort of reputation. So those are reputation-based ports. Milestone skills should be fairly self-explanatory. Homestead ports, that's an umbrella term that covers all ports that are in homesteads. So your personal house port, your kin house port, and your kin member's house port all fall within that category. Now, the reputation-based ports are kind of independent and autonomous. So they don't share a cooldown, for instance. And so for that reason, I allow any number of different reputation-based ports. You just can't use the same one more than once. So for instance, you could use the Ostgaruth port once, but you can't use it twice. But you could use that one once, and then you could also use other ports like the Tornhad port or the Lanuk port or some other kind of reputation-based port, like like your Thorin's Hall port. You could use those all separately once, but you can't use any given reputation-based port more than once. For milestone skills, you can only use any milestone skill to anywhere once during the course of the run. And you can only use a homestead port, regardless of what type it is. You can only use a homestead port, anything in the category of homestead port, once in the course of a run. Now, if you have access to 2 or 3 homestead ports, because you not only have your own house, but maybe you're also an akin, for instance, then it's up to you to choose which of those you use in this run. And typically that would be the one that's closest to the stable master in the homestead, because usually you do a homestead port and then you go over to the stable master and then you stable master somewhere. You take a taxi somewhere. So it's up to you to choose which of those homestead ports, but you can only use one of them once during the course of a run. So let's talk about mithril coin purchases. And what I'm saying here is that no benefit is allowed from purchases which require mithril coin. Now, that's very careful wording there. The kinds of purchases I'm talking about are either ones that are done in real time during the course of a run, such as, for instance, travel to quest objective, which something you can purchase for instant travel using mithril coins, and you can only buy that with mithril coins. It also applies to purchases that are made before the run, and although it's redundant to say so, that would include the Lalia's Market port. The reason I say it's redundant is because the Lalia's Market port doesn't fall into any of the 3 allowed categories that I mentioned in the previous bullet point. So the one additional clarification I need to make there is I've said that homestead ports are allowed. If you were to buy a premium house with mithril coin, then you would be allowed to use that homestead port because mithril coin is not, strictly speaking, required to buy that house. You could also use housing writs. So I'm excluding that from the constraint. Just because you pay mithril coin to buy a premium house doesn't mean you are precluded from using that port that you got from buying that house for this run. And that would also extend to kin houses or kin members' houses. So the fact that you paid mithril for a house is irrelevant because you could also pay housing writs, and therefore mithril coin is not technically required to buy the house. Now let's talk about buffs. And I'm describing these as being speed enhancing or speed preserving. So what the heck is a speed preserving buff? Speed enhancing is pretty self-explanatory, but what is speed preserving? Well, a speed preserving buff is one which prevents your speed from being reduced. And the prime example of that would be the burglar's safe fall skill, which prevents a fall injury if you have a fall, as long as you don't fall too far down, in which case you get defeated. So that would be an example of a speed preserving buff. And what I'm saying about those buffs is that they're not allowable if they're class exclusive, race exclusive, if they're from consumables or from gear. There are pieces of gear that give a run speed buff. Those would be disallowed under this constraint. So the burglar safe fall would be excluded anyway because it's class exclusive, for instance. The high elf run speed buff is forbidden. even though it's like a persistent buff, hunter find the path, etc. All those kind of buffs are forbidden. Now, one thing that's not forbidden, though, is the dash ability, the war steed dash ability. I believe it's for light war steeds, and I think it's in the Rohirrim stance discipline. I could be wrong on that, but dash is allowed because it's not ruled out by any of those things I mentioned. It's not class exclusive, race exclusive, from consumables or from gear. So, I mean, war steeds aren't really considered gear. So that exception exists. However, I also point out that that ability is not usable in the vast majority of Eriador where booze runs take place. So it has limited applicability. As I mentioned, I use the Björninghus port, and while you're in Björninghus, you are able to use the dash ability there, but it doesn't violate the constraint to use it. Travel maps. So the only travel maps I allow in this set of constraints are those that are acquirable within the festival system itself. And I think it's perfectly reasonable that if you're grinding festival and the activity of grinding the festival presents an opportunity for you to accelerate your grinding of festival, then that's perfectly okay, because you're just feeding into the same feedback loop of the festival. But as soon as you step outside of that loop and you start introducing travel maps from other sources, such as rare world drops that you could buy on the auction house, for instance, unless you were lucky enough to get them yourself, or travel maps that you buy from the store, things like that, then you start making this less accessible, because not everybody is going to be lucky enough to get those maps, or they don't have enough money to pay for them, to buy them from the auction house, or enough LP to buy them from the store. So I'm just disallowing those. But the ones that you can earn from the festival system itself are fair game. And I use the anniversary map, which you can barter. Each of those maps you can barter for one anniversary token, while the anniversary is active. And those maps port you to the fireworks area of Bree. And I use that as like a secondary West Bree port, since I can only use the West Bree port once in the course of a run, but I really want to use it twice. Instead, as a substitute, I use the anniversary map, and then it's about 8 seconds to ride down from the fireworks area to the West Bree Stable Master and continue on. So it is a slight optimization. I've done some calculations as to how long it takes to grind the tokens to get the anniversary maps, and at the end of the day, it really only saves about 8 seconds. But still, every little optimization counts. So even if you make that adjustment, it's still an 8-second advantage. So lastly, I talk about the Fateful Toolkit. And as I mentioned earlier, this one doesn't come from my booze run optimizations. This one is specific to a challenge that's related to acquiring tokens. Because if you're not familiar with it, the Fateful Toolkit is a bonus item from the Ultimate Edition of the Fate of Gundabad expansion. And among other things, it provides a bonus to token acquisition. And at first glance, it may not seem like a very generous bonus because it's only 10%, until you realize that it rounds up. So for booze runs in particular, since each one of those quests normally gives 1 token, if you're using the Fateful Toolkit, then it gives you 2 tokens. So it doubles the amount of tokens. The reason I exclude it here is 2 reasons. One is because not everybody can pony up the $100 US dollars or more that is required to buy the Ultimate Edition of Gundabad. So I want to make this accessible to people who can't afford that, which is probably most people. The other reason is that at the 100 token level, using the Fateful Toolkit kind of makes a whole a mockery of the whole challenge. I actually did a 100 token run using the Fateful Toolkit, and what it degenerated into was a full booze run plus 3 crafting turn-ins, right? The reason that I could get away with so few things is because, as I mentioned before, when you do a booze run with the Fateful Toolkit equipped, you're doubling the number of tokens from the quests. So instead of only getting 11 tokens for each faction, you get 22 tokens for each faction. So you can, overall, in the aggregate, you can barter for 22 boxes. And then, surprisingly, when you open those boxes, you also get a bonus to your token acquisition. So instead of only being 3 tokens per box, it's 4 tokens per box. So 22 boxes times 4 is 88 tokens. Then the 3 crafting turn-ins, normally there are 3 tokens, you get 3 tokens each for them. With the Fateful Toolkit, you get 4 tokens each, so that's 12, plus the 88 you got from the booze run is 100 tokens. All of that can be done in 30 minutes, a big chunk of which is just simply bartering for 22 boxes of tokens and then opening them. But really, it's kind of a stupid, ridiculous way to hit that goal. So maybe someday I'll put out a 150 token challenge or 200 token challenge and allow the use of a Fateful Toolkit. But for now, I'm just going to say, nope, can't use it. Do it the hard way, quote unquote. All right, so that finally, we're done with the constraints page. So let me start the footage of the run itself. All right, so let's get this show on the road. Before I start, I do want to point out a couple of things, though. First of all, in my festival, the festivals and events category of my wallet, you see that I don't have any Midsummer tokens, I don't have any in-league tokens, and I don't have any Ale Association tokens. So I'm starting completely from 0 in the relevant categories of currency. I do, however, have a bit of a embarrassment of riches when it comes to Farmers Fair tokens. And that's not because I really, really, really love the Farmers Fair and I want to barter everything from the Farmers Fair. It's okay, but basically, I do so much festival running, booze running, and so forth, that I always have more than enough tokens to barter for anything that I want. So in order to keep my wallet relatively clean, at every festival, I just plow all of the tokens that I have into whatever the currency is for the next festival on the schedule. And the next festival on the schedule after Midsummer is Farmers Fair, so I have a whole bunch of tokens stored up in Farmers Fair. And if I don't use up all of those, which I don't think I'll be using up all of those anytime soon, then I'll plow that into whatever the next one is. I assume that's Harvest Math and so on and so forth, Yule and Spring and so forth. So that's why I have so many of those. But as you can see, I don't have any of the others. The other thing I want to call attention to before I actually kick this off is in the lower right-hand corner, I have a stopwatch, which I haven't started yet. I'll start it when I actually begin the run in earnest. But the purpose of embedding a stopwatch there is that the final video will have some sections that I'll just fast forward through. I might also do some freeze frames. I don't know yet. I'll have to see how it works out. But so in order to just track the real time, I'm embedding a stopwatch there so that one can always zoom in on that and see what the elapsed real time is, regardless of whether the video has been manipulated in terms of speeding up or slowing down or freezing. So let's get this party on the road. I will start my stopwatch, and the first thing to do, as always, is to pick up the daily wrapper quest from Faelleth, then head into the stables and do aiding the stable hands. There's no reason not to do this one. It's pretty quick, but more importantly, the location is right next to the festival or the daily wrapper NPC. So you could either do this right after you pick up the wrapper or as you're about to turn in the wrapper. So let me just run through this, and I just won't give very much commentary because I think people know this quest. So that one is done. I now have my first tokens of the run, 3 tokens from that quest. Head up to the citadel. And as usual, you want to interrupt that swift travel in the tunnel there and then head up. You'll see I'm using a war steed. This is not exactly the most friendly route for a war steed because there's all these little jutting out pieces with lanterns on them, which you can see you can get stuck on if you're not careful. But if you slow down around the turns, then this one, head in there. All right, so from Merillion, we want to pick up something floral to the last drop and wedding supplies. From Othnoron the cook over here, we want to pick up tasty morsels. And from the florist, we want to pick up floral crowns. Do not pick up arranging arrangements. That's a disaster from an efficiency standpoint. All right, so while we're up here in the Citadel, we might as well get out of the way the Feast Hall quest for Faramir. And in my timings, the Faramir version of the Feast Hall quest is the fastest one, although it has been pointed out to me that it might depend on whether you have long loading screens or not. Because there are some loading screens that are involved. If you do have long loading screens, then it's possible, I think, that your next best choice would be Gimli, because his quest takes place entirely within the Feast Hall. Now, one little micro optimization that I have come across, when leaving the Feast Hall and exiting to the outside, jumping down from the top, even though you break your legs, is, I think, slightly faster than making your way down the staircase. I haven't exhaustively analyzed that, but my gut tells me that that's a faster way to go. Right, so head out and bury a stone in the soil of the white tree, or white tree sapling, I guess is the official term. And let's turn in the quest to Faramir. So now we're up to 7 tokens. So at this point, I'm going to head down to the city stables and kind of, sort of, work my way up the tiers. I'm going to do the Floral Crowns quest, which takes place on the first circle. Now, if you interrupt this, then it gets you just a little bit closer to where you want to be to continue the quest here. Another little micro optimization. She wanders a bit. And now I'm going to start collecting these summer flowers. It might be slightly more efficient to do one side and then come back and do the other side, but I'm always a little bit nervous that I won't have picked up enough on one side, and so I'll come all the way back the other side only to discover that I have to go back again because I didn't get enough. So for me, I kind of do a crisscross and gather the flowers on both sides as I'm going through. Most of them are on this side anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so now that quest is done, but not turned in yet. Let's head up to the second circle, otherwise known as the Soldier's Tier. So on the second circle, you could pick up this quest, Artistic Direction, on the way back from the Splintered Shield, but I generally prefer to pick it up on my way in to the Splintered Shield because I'm less likely to forget it that way. As a micro optimization, you can jump up the fence here. Sometimes you get a rubber band, but still, even if you have to do 2 or 3 tries, it's generally faster than going all the way around. Once in the Splinter Shield, I'm going to go up here and pick up the Toss a Coin quest and start clicking on the minstrels to pay them to get lost, essentially. As I have pointed out in other videos, if you're lucky and you fall correctly here and bounce off of the barrels, you don't get broken legs. Now, I wasn't lucky that time, but even if you do get broken legs, it's only a very short slowdown, and by the time you've tossed a coin to the next minstrel, usually your legs are back to normal and you're at normal speed. Now, for this one, you can just stand underneath the minstrel. You don't have to go all the way up, and then just select the NPC and then do a use, and that's all you need to do. Down here, there's another minstrel. Now, I'm going to turn floaty names off, and for me, I have this pattern memorized, so I know exactly which goblet I should be clicking on, but I do want to kind of show off the plugin here, and you see this is the zoomed in version of the plugin. What you want to do is you line up the images of the goblets, and then you look for a goblet with a yellow outline, and you see this one here is the one with the yellow outline. When you're done with the overlay, you can just dismiss it by clicking in the center, and I know that that is the correct one, so I will sample it. Meanwhile, I'll put my floating names back on. There we go. That was the correct one. Zoom back out. Grab the barrel of wine. That's the quick way to do it. Now, if you have that pattern memorized, you don't really need the plugin at all. The plugin is really just a helper for people that either can't memorize it or are still in the process of memorizing the pattern. And sorry if the whole, matching the pattern is a spoiler for anybody, but I'm sure that if you've seen videos on how to do Midsummer, you've probably already seen that spoiler. All right, so get the last 2 minstrels and turn in the quest. Now, I haven't done an exhaustive analysis, but my gut tells me that jumping off here and heading to the door is slightly faster than going down the stairway, thanks to the changes that they've made to the way that fall injury works. But I might be wrong on that. Again, that's just a gut feeling. That's one thing that I intend to analyze further, which I can do even when the festival isn't active. All right, so now let's head back to the second circle Stable Master. So the trick here is, even though my next quest objectives are on the second circle, I'm going to take a taxi ride to the third circle and then interrupt it. That leaves me roughly halfway down the ramp, which is exactly where I need to be, and that's a faster way to get to these quest objectives than just riding all the way around. All right, so now for Lebadar, progress Artistic Direction, pick up Growing Pains. Growing Pains is not a quest that I usually take because it's horribly inefficient. But when you're scraping the bottom of the barrel, trying to get 60 tokens from MTM, then it's something that I pick up. Now, I have a plugin in effect here, and if I click on the correct hound, I'll get immediate feedback. There we go. There's my feedback. For me, that's better than having to keep one eye on the chat log all the time. And also, it deals with the fact that the billboard messages, the ones that appear at the center of the screen, if you're clicking a lot, they tend to lag behind. So the plugin gives you instant feedback, and therefore it speeds things up a little bit. If you don't like the flashing, you can turn that off. If you want to squish up that image and put it in another part of the screen so it's not right in the middle of the screen, you can do that. For that matter, you could use your own image if you wanted to, and put that in the plugin resources directory and use that instead of the image that I've provided. It's a very customizable plugin config. All right, so now I'm going to do the quest objectives for growing pains here in the garden part of the third circle. Quest objectives done. Now I'm going to head all the way back to the ramp down to the second circle and turn in the quest and then come back up. At that point, I will be completely done with everything on the second circle other than a quest turn in. So now let's head up to the third circle and hit it hard with a bunch of quest completions. I'll start off by grabbing some of the wedding supplies that are around this part of the third circle. It's not mandatory to pick up wedding supplies here because there will be plenty for the quest in the lower part of the third circle. But I like to pick these ones up because I think less people know about the ones that are in this part of the third circle, and therefore there's less competition. So I'll pick up a couple in this area. Now I'm going to do the crafting assisted quests, or the crafting item quests, which I just happen to have those items in my inventory. Imagine that. So now, in order to get to the next quest objective, there is a little bit of a optimization here, and I want to thank Narrowfind, the streamer named Narrowfind, for clarifying this for me. But if you want to get to the bottom part of the third circle from here, what you do is you take the stable ride up to the fourth circle and then interrupt it, and that puts you on the down ramp and close to where you need to be for your next set of quest objectives. So I kind of had a feeling that that was the case, but that didn't really gel in my mind until Narrowfind pointed that out on one of his streams, and it's like, oh yeah, that is a faster way. Saves you a bit of time. Right, there's usually wedding supplies right around here. So now at this point, I have completed the objectives for artistic direction by clicking on Kiriel. Then I picked up her quest, Sweet Treats, which involves going around and feeding these hungry guards. While I'm feeding the guards, I'm also picking up wedding supplies. Now, this is the only part of this whole run where I'm going to switch between a regular mount and a war steed, just because there's so much stopping and starting involved that a war steed would be kind of silly because of the longer mount time. All right, so now I have all of my wedding supplies. I have half of my sweet treats, and I will get back on my war steed, and you won't see me use a regular mount for the rest of the video. Half of the sweet treats, 2 of the 4 sweet treats are clockwise from Kiriel, and the other 2 are counterclockwise. So let me go counterclockwise and grab the two that are up here. Got the third, and now for the fourth. This guy wanders a bit. There, got him. Quest objectives are complete. Now let's head back to Curiel. All right, so now all of the third circle objectives are complete. Let's head up to the fourth circle and do tasty morsels. Now between the fourth NPC and the fifth and last NPC, there is a temptation to try to do a little bit of a shortcut by jumping over that fence. I would not recommend doing that on a warsteed. The fence is just high enough that it's not going to want to let you over. Chances are that you're just going to rubber band back and forth. And a little bit of lag there. You're going to rubber band back and forth. So don't try to jump over the fence. Just make your way around the fence. Even though it might take a fraction of a second longer, it's worth avoiding the frustration. Right, so I headed down to the second circle to hand in that quest. I'm done with the second circle, and at this point, the third circle also. I'm going to take a stable to the high stables, but I'm not headed to the citadel just yet. Rather, I'm going to do one of the Houses of Healing quests, and it's going to be in the High Hall. Now, I think this door is mislabeled because it says it's the House of Remedies, but I think it should say that it's the High Hall. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Pick up the quest, A Cure for All Ills. This is the one where you go around and shoo away the noisy revelers and pick up half-empty bottles of wine. Normally, I go the other direction, but I saw another player who's doing the same thing, and I think there's a cooldown after you shoo the noisy revelers, so I don't want to be in competition with that other player, so I went in the opposite direction. Okay, so finally, I'm done with that quest. It's not the most efficient, time-efficient quest by any stretch of the imagination, but when you're trying to get 60 tokens in MTM, it's you have to dig pretty deep. All right, so now I'm going to do a YOLO here. I believe that that's a little bit faster than going down the ramps, even though you break your legs, and head down to the Houses of Lore. 4 of these floral arrangements are on the bottom. 2 are up top. The remaining 2 are in this room over here. So while I'm here, I will also do the Love is in the Air quest, which involves grabbing these pieces of paper that are floating around, which can be annoying at times, and also may cause you to have to compete with other players. If you're familiar with the catching the envelopes in, I think it's Anniversary, you should be fairly at home with this. There's one of them behind this door. Some of these verses are downstairs, but I think it would be a waste of time to go down and collect them because you'd only have to come back up anyway. So that would be extra travel time. There's enough upstairs that you don't have to do that. Right, and the last one is in the same room where I placed those final floral vases. There it is. Grab it. All right. Done with that. Turn that in. Now, when leaving the Houses of Lore, if you jump down this railing and turn as you go by the pillar, then if you're lucky, you won't break your legs. Again, I was unlucky, but it's a short break. By the time I get through that door portal, I'm already at normal speed, so it's no big deal. It's faster than going down the stairs. All right, so now we are ready to turn a bunch of stuff in. Head up to the citadel. To Marillion, we turn in something floral. To the last drop and wedding supplies. To Othnaran the cook, we turn in tasty morsels, a little bit of lag there. And lastly, to the florist, we turn in floral crowns. That gets us up to 55. Now let's head down to Faelleth on the first circle to hand in the daily wrapper. Right, so now we're up to our 60 tokens from Minas Tirith Midsummer. And it's time to start the non-MTM portion of this video. Hypothetically, I could have used my rep port to get here, and that would be a faster way into the Thorin's Hall Inn, but I'm actually going to save that for later in the run, since I can only use it once. So before I start the actual booze run here, I'm going to pick up Jonar's quest, Jonar's special delivery, pick up Covert Reparations 1 for the Inn League, and pick up the Kit Gathering quest, A Midsummer Shine, and start working on that quest. An unkempt dwarf there, another unkempt dwarf there. There's a total of 4 unkempt dwarves right here in the inn. So shine the beards of all 4 of those. But don't forget to click on this guy to progress the Covert Reparations. Now let's head up to the crafting area, where we will find more unkempt dwarves for more beard shining. And you see the synergy here. I'm progressing the Covert Reparations. At the same time, I'm finding these unkempt dwarves and progressing the Kit Gathering quest. Right, so I completed the Kit Gathering quest, A Midsummer Shine, and now all that remains is for me to run around and do the quest objectives for Covert Reparations. This one up here next to the ever-flashing puzzle vault. And this one up here where I bother a monarch, a head of state, with the very important question of, do you have any candy? And in that quest, get a token and a kit. And in this quest, get a Inn League token. See, now I'm starting to accumulate Inn League tokens. And now it's time to actually start the booze run. I'm going to click on the Ale Association Tavern Keep. The first one I'm going to pick up is Drink of the Best Character, because I'm going to lock that one in my quest tracker. All the others I don't really care about. I'll explain why later, but I do want that one permanently in my quest tracker until it's completed. So pick up all of those, and one of them I can do the fake booze pickup right here in the inn. All right, from here, let's head to Bree and the Prancing Pony. Do those 2 fake booze pickups. Head to the Breeland Festival grounds, and since we're riding right past it anyway, let's do a horse race. And hopefully the lag doesn't dump me in the drink here. All right, there's the horse race done. And now let's head down to the Thornley's worksite delivery. So after Thornley's, I'm going to port to no bottle. And the reason for doing that is that it has a direct swift travel to Dweeland, which gets me closer to Thrassy's Lodge. But in order to shave off a few seconds, I'm going to interrupt that swift travel. So now, after that delivery, I'm going to use one of my new optimizations, which is porting to Herne in Cardolan, and then from there, a swift travel to the Inn of the Forsaken. Now, I'm going to travel to my personal house, which among the various homestead ports that I have available to me is the closest one to the stablemaster. It's not really close. It's not as close as some houses are to the stablemaster, but it's close enough. See, it's just around the corner here and over the bridge. Where I'm going to travel to is Mitchell Delving, and I'll start the whole Shire sequence of pickups and a delivery. Interrupt that. After that, then do a swift travel to Hobbiton. So now I'm going to do a slight diversion from my normal booze run sequence, because I'm going to go up to the party tree and drop the stink bomb. I drop the stink bomb, so that's my extra Ale Association quest done, completed, ready to turn in. And let me head over to Bywater. Now remember, there's two quests here. Sometimes if I'm not focusing, I only pick up one or progress one of them, and then that pretty much screws up my entire run, because then I have to backtrack later, and that destroys my time. So after Frogmorton, I'm going to head up to the Plough and Stars in Brockenborings, and now you see why I locked that quest in my log, so that I have a nice quest arrow pointing me in the right direction. If I don't have that quest arrow, or if I don't use a plugin like Waypoint or something like that, then I have a tendency to drift either to the east or the west, which means I have to backtrack, and that wastes time. So now, the only main thing I need to worry about is that when I approach the Plough and Stars, I want to slow down. Otherwise, I end up jumping off that ridge and breaking my legs, and that slows me down and wastes time. So as I get closer, I will decelerate, and hopefully, yeah, I got a short break. No big deal. Now make the delivery here in Brockenborings. And head up to Oatbarton. So here's where I use my anniversary map to get to the next stop, which is Ziggelgund through Surikaila. If you don't have an anniversary map, then the next best thing would be from Oatbarton, do the swift travel for Ostferode, and then from there to Surikaila, and then from there to Ziggelgund. Now, one thing that I've been experimenting with this year is, instead of letting that slow fade-in happen on the swift travel, I dismount and then ride my warsteed into Ziggelgund. I don't know for sure if that's faster in and of itself, but it has the added benefit that my next stop, for which I use a milestone, means that since I'm already mounted, I will stay mounted and I won't have to spend time mounting in O'Hare. I'll do some further analysis and see if overall whether that saves time or not. But it's an interesting little twist. Okay, so for the next stop, I'm going to use my Björninghus port, which, as I've noted previously, is not available on all servers. Or maybe you just haven't done the rep grind or can't be bothered. One nice thing about this is that you can use dash. Not that it necessarily saves you any time, because as you can see, sometimes it takes a while for that stable master to show up anyway. But at least you have a chance of improving your time using dash. From Björninghus, head to Vegbar, and from Vegbar to Hrimbarg. This is the fastest way I know to get to Hrimbarg from any generic place in the world. Next stop, I use my Tornhad port, which I was able to rearrange with the Ostgaruth port. From Tornhad, then go up to Eckert Candeleth. Now for the next stop, if you feel like it and you have the means, you could use the map to the Tracery Archive, walk out of the archive, fall down, and go to the Hall of Fire. But within my constraints, I'm not going to use that map. Instead, I'm just going to take the swift travel to the last homely house and to the Hall of Fire that way. It is nice that there are no loading screens when entering the Wall of Fire these days, the Hall of Fire. I keep resisting the impulse to pause momentarily for the loading screen, which doesn't exist anymore. All right, now take the West Bree port, head towards Estelden, but I'm going to interrupt that swift travel and mount up and head over to Othrakar. By the way, even if you're using a regular mount, it's faster to interrupt that swift travel and head up to Othrakar on your mount than it is to ride all the way into Estelden and then take the taxi. So just a little tip there for those who are not using a war steed and doing booze runs. Now, normally in a typical booze run, I would then take my rep port to Thorin's Hall for the next delivery, but I'm going to save that for the barter. So instead, I'm going to do a triple swift travel here. I'm going to click on the Mission Recruiter Stable Master. Swift travel number 1 is to Anuk Corfu. Swift travel number 2 is to South Bree. And swift travel number 3 is to Thorin's Gate. I'll interrupt that, and as it turns out, an interrupted normal swift travel to Thorin's Gate puts you actually closer to the next stop than the rep port. So that's why that's the best choice for this particular point in the run. And for the last delivery, I have saved my Ostgaruth port because it's in the Lone Lands, the delivery is. And this is actually my preferred way to make this last delivery, approaching from the west rather than the east after a Tornhad port, because when you approach from the east, there's a nasty little cliff that you have to navigate very carefully, or you'll get pretty significant broken legs, and that will slow you down. When approaching from this side, you have a nice smooth ridge that rarely causes any broken legs. So I've always preferred this way. This is the way I did it for many years before the Tornhead port was available. And now that it's available again, I feel like this is I'm back in my normal groove of how I do this last delivery. So that's the end of the booze run. Now, what remains is to turn in that one remaining quest that you see in the quest tracker in Thorin's Hall, and then to barter in Thorin's Hall, and then to barter in Michel Delving. Now, one of the things about these barters is that there's a cooldown on opening the boxes. So the best course is usually to interleave the opening of the boxes and the bartering of the boxes. Another thing to note is that you can barter or you can open the boxes while you're moving. So I'm doing a little parallel work here as I'm moving around. You can also open the boxes while you're riding, but you cannot open the boxes while on a taxi ride, and you can't open the boxes while you're mounting. So there's some opportunities for box opening, but other times you're too busy, is the message. And there we are up to 100 tokens. Let me stop the timer. Slightly shy of 68 minutes, which, to be honest, is a little disappointing because on a prior run, I was able to do this in 64 minutes. Unfortunately, there were some glitches and some mistakes and some confusing aspects, and that's why I didn't present that one. But just so you know, it is possible to do this without actually fundamentally changing anything. This could be done in as few as 64 minutes, but this particular run is almost 68 minutes. Okay, so to wrap all of this up, I will use a slide from the intro, reuse a slide that I already showed in the intro, which just kind of breaks down where all of these tokens come from, all of the different sources. On the right side, the Minas Tirith Midsummer batch comes from the regular 10 quests that I would do for my quick 10 quest daily wrapper route. But to that, I added 9 more Midsummer quests. So as you can imagine, it went from a very efficient route, which could be done in as little as 11 minutes, but to a kind of a heavyweight route with a lot of inefficient quests, and of the 19 quests, plus the handing in of the wrapper, that took about, 31-ish minutes, 32 minutes or more. So obviously the efficiency plummeted there, but that's to be expected when you're reaching deep into the quest, the festival quests that are available. Then you're going to have to mix in some that are quite inefficient. But hopefully I've come up with a decent route there. I'm sure it can be improved upon. So on that side, in Minas Tirith Midsummer, there are 60 quests, 60 tokens from 19 quests plus the wrapper. And the reason for the funky math there is that not all of those quests give 3 tokens. One of the 19 quests gives 1 token, and then the wrapper itself gives 5 tokens. So that explains the math on that side. So outside of Minas Tirith Midsummer, I added as well as those quests, I added the booze run, the normal booze run, which is 11 quests for each of the factions. And to that, I added an extra quest for each faction. Since you have to barter those tokens in pairs, that means I go from only 30 tokens for a standalone full booze run up to 36 tokens. So now with the 60 we already have from Minas Tirith Midsummer, that we're up to 96. And then the extra 4 tokens come from a horse race, which is the Breland horse race, plus one of the kit gathering quests, which is the Midsummer Shine quest, which involves shining the beards of dwarves. So that's the extra 4 tokens, which gets us up to a total of 100. Now, as I mentioned previously, a full booze run, I've got that down, even under hardcore constraints, I've gotten that down to roughly 24 minutes. But in this case, not only did I run do the actual booze run and threw in a few more quests, but because this is a token challenge, I also had to include the time to get back to the barter places and barter for the boxes of festival tokens, and then the time it took to open those boxes, and that added another several minutes. So obviously the overall efficiency suffered, and the bottom line is that to acquire 100 tokens took roughly 68 minutes. I have on a previous run done it in 64 minutes, so I need to do some more analysis and fine-tuning, but that's the long and short of it, is that you can get 100 tokens in about 68 minutes if you meet some of these prerequisites and you follow an efficient route. If you don't meet all the prerequisites, if you don't have an anniversary map hanging around, then I'm going to try and list some substitutes in the description of this video. But in any case, hopefully this will help someone who wants to grind out a lot of tokens quickly, or those who just simply like the game, as it were, within a game of trying to come up with more optimal routes. I would like to inspire people to come up with new ideas and new concepts and come up with an even more efficient route than this. That would please me, because this is not the be all and end all. This is just one entry into the ring, so as it were, as to how to optimize a 100 token challenge. So hopefully folks found it interesting and informative, and maybe it would be useful to someone if they're trying to grind out tokens. But in any case, there's always next year if we want to try this again. So I will catch you on the next video. Bye-bye.